Just to warn you before I begin this video, I got my COVID booster and my flu jab today, so if I'm a bit dozier than usual, that will be why. It is November, which for many people here on BookTube means it is non-fiction November. And if you forgot about that or didn't know, as we're coming to the end, I have some recommendations for you. I have nine non-fiction books that are pretty short, that if you pick one of these, you can definitely finish before the end of the month. The book that gave me the idea to film this video was Freedom is a Constant Struggle, Ferguson, Palestine and the Foundations of a Movement by Angela Y. Davis. Angela Davis is a well-known feminist and Black liberation activist and academic. She was a member of the Black Panthers, or involved with the Black Panthers as part of her liberation movement, and is now a well-known speaker and author and I believe professor at a university, although I'm not sure which one. This was published in 2016, around the time of the Ferguson movement, and it is a collection of essays and speeches and interviews that she gave in sort of 2015, early 2016 time, about these things and about Palestine and about the relationship between the prison industrial complex and Palestine, about racial liberation and the relation between the military industrial complex in America and Israel as well. And it is really, they're very short, very concise pieces, because they are speeches or short essays that are collected together. So very, very easy to read, and very easy to read quickly. It's also a good précis or intro to the topic. Of course, being nearly a decade old, it doesn't include everything like the 2020 Black Lives Matter movement or the current ongoing genocide in Gaza. Those things aren't included in here because it's older than that. But if you are new to any of these topics, you haven't read a lot of sort of intersectional feminism, Black liberation or Palestinian studies books, then I think this could be a good intro, particularly if you are in the US or coming from a Western perspective, because it kind of talks about the complicity of the systems in which we live with all of these things, and also it's an introduction from a perspective of politics and culture and society that you will already understand. It's not the deepest of Angela Davis's work or any works on these topics. It is definitely a overview and an introduction. But if that is something you are looking for, I think this is a good one. Angela Davis is a very simple writer in a good way. She makes everything very clear and straightforward. So if that is what you were looking for, I think this one would be great, and it is less than 150 pages. One that I read, I think, last year and really loved was Stay True by Hua Hsu, which is a memoir of the experience of Hua Hsu growing up in California in the 80s and 90s as a Taiwanese American, and his experience of his father working in Taiwan. I think they were called astronaut parents or something, moonlander. There was a name that was related to space about them being so distant from one another and talking to each other via fax. And then his growing up to be this kind of pretentious, annoying boy who's obsessed with his own taste and very insecure, and he goes off to university and meets these friends. And I found it really beautiful and moving. It talks about his meeting with his friend in university who was Japanese American, and also his working with Filipino and Vietnamese, the children of Filipino and Vietnamese immigrants in a school, and the kind of the homogenizing and flattening, was viewing of Asian Americans as being all one, but the actual variety of experience across the cultures, particularly the difference between fourth generation Japanese American and a child of Vietnamese boat people, being very, very different experience of America. But the main thing that happens in this book, I have seen some people say what it is, but I went in not knowing, and I think that made it work better for me. So I'm not going to say, but there is at the middle of this book, there is a pivot and a change to the book, and it becomes much more vulnerable and much more personal, I think, after that moment. And whilst I was enjoying it going into this, I really like his writing style and his kind of insights into culture and affectionate disdain with which he held his teenage self, I think was really enjoyable to read. But that moment really made it very much more emotional and impactful for me when it turns and he starts to explore some more deeper, more vulnerable aspects of life. Another one I read a couple of years ago is On Gallows Down by Nicola Chester. This is about Nicola Chester's experience living in the south of England in a rural place, and her experience of rurality and activism in order to protect the environment and the place in which she lives. She grew up near Greenham Common, and so she was involved in, sort of tangentially as a very young person, involved in the Greenham Common encampment, which was an encampment to protest against the keeping of nuclear weapons in England. And she talks about that experience and also her experience with her children being involved in Extinction Rebellion, and also a protest against the M4 bypass going around her town, where she slept in trees and things. And she talks a lot about the nature. It is a nature writing book, where she talks about the nature of the place that she lived, but she also talks about the history of it and the history of things like Luddites and Levellers, and kind of a history of environmental protest in England, and how that is a deep history of the people. And she writes it from a much more class-based perspective, and the experience of enclosure of common land, the slow taking away of the countryside from the people who actually live there, her experience with the great estate in the area in which she lives, and the treatment and disdain for actual people. And I think that this book was really powerful in being kind of combining beautiful nature writing with a much more like strident political message, and also bringing together these historic ideas, because there is a lot of ideas of what the English countryside is, and I think she managed to disrupt that quite well in this book. Another really short one I liked was Against White Feminism by Rafia Zakaria. Rafia Zakaria is a Pakistani-American woman who has worked with NGOs and the UN, and she talks about her experience about feminism and global feminism from the perspective of a woman from the global south. And so she talks about the racism she has experienced from white women within feminist movements, but also about the limitations of and the white saviorism of those movements. A lot of the times she talks about Melinda Gates and Bill Gates and their kind of ineffective white saviour kind of white liberal actions within the global south, and how they don't actually interact with people from that place, but are taking assumptions of what they believe would help without having much knowledge, just feeling because they are, you know, very rich people that therefore they would understand. And she mixed that again with the history of colonial feminisms and white women in the early part of the 20th century in the British Empire, which I found very interesting. I really enjoyed the kind of depth of this book, that it went into a lot more detail. Like, this wasn't like baby's first feminism. Like, a lot of the books that I see recommended as feminist texts are definitely much more like pop feminism and much more graspable as your entryway. This one felt like it was doing more like analysis of feminism itself, nuanced and complicating ideas in a way that I thought was really, really good. And I really liked the like stridency of it and the way she manages to combine anecdotes of her personal experience within these spaces with history and facts and statistics about the dangers of international charity and the abuses that international charity has made around the world, and also with a kind of liberal cultural hegemony, which I thought was a really interesting perspective. Calypso by David Sedaris is in a very different vein to all of the books that I have talked about so far, and the rest of the books that I will talk about as well. It is many people on BookTube's problematic fave is David Sedaris. He is a writer who he writes like essays, and his books are kind of collections of essays and experiences. Calypso is the only one of his that I have read, but I did really enjoy it. He does seem like a very angry man who has a lot of strident, not nice ideas about people in general, but he is really, really funny. I often don't laugh at books. I find books that are meant to be humorous often don't really make me laugh. But I really enjoyed the kind of wit and the sardonic nature of this book. A lot of it talks about his family, his experience traveling with his family, or his family like holidaying in this big home. There's a lot of like wealth and New York elite about the book, but I really, really enjoyed it. Anyway, he is very cutting and very dry about everyone in his family. And I think if you are looking for a laugh, this is one of the few books that has actually made me laugh. It may not be for everyone. If you are a kinder person than I am, you might not find it funny. But if you enjoy reading witty people bitch about people, then I think you would enjoy David Sedaris. The other physical book I have is Rebel Bodies by Sarah Graham. This looks fairly chunky, but like the back 20% is notes, as is often the case, notes and references, as is often the case with non-fiction. Now, I do have to admit up front here that Sarah Graham is a very good friend of mine, and so like I am not unbiased when talking about this book, but this is my favourite book that I have ever read about women's health and the gender pain gap and the gendered issues in medicine, medical sexism. And I've read a lot as a disabled woman. I have read a lot. Rebel Bodies is very UK focused because Sarah is a UK based journalist, and so I think that is good because a lot of the ones I've read have been US focused, but I do think a lot of it is more universal. She takes different subjects in relation to women's health and doesn't just focus on reproductive health, although there are things about endometriosis and other periods, and then also she talks about mental health and hypochondria and also about things like cancer and heart disease and how the treatment of those in women is not as women suffer more from medical negligence in those areas. And she also talks about medical research and things like that in relation to this, like how drugs weren't tested on women until like the 90s. There was a lot less research money put towards studying things that are considered to be women's issues. And I really, really enjoy this. As I said, it is written in different sections, different topics. So if you wanted to, you could just jump around to the topics that are most of interest to you in order to make it a quicker read. But I think it's definitely worth reading for all of them. I also really enjoyed how Sarah interviews a lot of people, patients, activists, doctors, researchers. This is very broad. It is not as personal and individualistic as I think a lot of these books can. It is a lot more broad and systemic, which for me is definitely an advantage of this book. Sarah is not personalizing this, which I know a lot of people prefer, the like more memoir style. I prefer this much more journalistic, analytical style. I find that much more engaging and of interest. And she also, I think, does a really good job of integrating transness and gender non-conformity into her discussions, talking about non-binary people, talking about the treatment of trans people and how they interact with all of the issues that she's talking about. It's not just a footnote or a throwaway comment, as it has been in other books I've read about medical sexism. It is integrated into each of the sections. So I think that is very strong in this book. Things I Have Withheld by Kei Miller is another short collection of essays that I would definitely recommend. This one is much more in the memoir style than some of the others that I have talked about. Kei Miller talks about his own personal experience with various things, including Liam Neeson's racism, letters to James Baldwin, his experience travelling to Jamaica, where a lot of his family is from, and also travelling to different countries in Africa and feeling a connection as a black man, despite the fact that his family haven't lived there for hundreds of years. And also his experience growing up in the UK and of being a man in the UK now, a black man in the UK now. His personal experiences, discrimination, particularly through silence and through elision. That's why there's Things I Have Withheld. He also talks about family and family secrets, his own personal family, and the things that they have been withholding. Family being the things we don't tell each other, I think was a quote from it that I found really, really lovely. I think the guiding theme is racism and his experience as a black man and the legacies of colonialism throughout, but they are very personal and very individual, which is what I said I didn't enjoy so much in medical sexism books, but I think that Kei Miller is just really great at writing about that, and he's a poet, and there is such beauty and lyricism in the way that he writes. I actually listened to the audiobook of this one, and I would definitely recommend that because Miller reads it himself, and as a performance poet, I think a lot of the cadence and rhythm of the style in which he writes is reflected and performed through that audiobook. So I would definitely recommend listening to it for that reason. It is a book that challenges and looks at defense mechanisms and defensiveness, and keeping people at arm's distance in a way that I think is really beautifully done. Another memoir that I have really loved is Heavy by Kiese Laymon. This is one of my favourite non-fiction books of all time and my favourite memoir of all time, although I'm not a huge reader of memoir, but I really, really love this one. So this tells the story of Keise's life growing up in Atlanta, Georgia as a black man, and his relationship with his mother, who was a professor of English at a university and also very, very abusive. Kiese Laymon also grew up as a fat boy, and his experience being a fat black boy, how fatness interacted with his blackness and the stigma associated with it, and the eating disorders that he developed as a defense mechanism and a form of self-harm due to the experience of abuse that he grew up with, both from his mother and from a system that did not want black boys to thrive. And he goes to university, he talks about developing his writing, his experience in relationships and things. But I think what I love most about this book is both how vulnerable it is, how willing he is to go into dark places and places of where we could fear judgment. I don't think he has been afraid in writing this book. There is so much vulnerability on the page, and I think that that makes it all the more powerful. And then also the tightness of the writing. I think that Kiese Laymon is a really great writer, and the way that he structures this book is really, really impressive. The way that thoughts and ideas spiral and things come back around and are always reconnected, kind of interconnectivity. It's a completely non-individualistic book, which I think, despite the fact it is about one individual, there is a lot systemic in this and connective through family, across relationships, and also through time and in between people and peoples. And I think it is really brilliant, beautifully written, really engaging, very simple, not like floral or artistic in terms of the writing, but just so strong and so tight. Like, there is not a wasted word in this book. It is all so specific and so precise, and I really, really, really loved it. I think it's so impressive. Finally, the book I would recommend is Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde. This is another collection of essays. I think essay collections are definitely very quick reads and very good if you are trying to read more. I think that having so many different topics in them makes them conducive to that. Sister Outsider is a collection of essays from the feminist lesbian black scholar Audre Lorde in the, I think it's like late 60s to early 80s. I think that these essays are all written. And they are about her experience traveling to the Soviet Union and being part of one of their like propaganda campaigns around the Soviet Union. The interesting ways that she comparison between Soviet Union of the time and the USA of the time, and her limited experience, a real interrogation of that time period. And I thought that those were super interesting. I didn't realize they were how this book started. She also talks about her experience being mother to black boys, young black boys growing up in the 1970s, her interactions with white feminists. I think there are a lot of books actually on this list that you could read together. Like if you read Freedom is a Constant Struggle, Things I Have Withheld, Against White Feminism, Heavy, and Sister Outsider all together, I think there would be a lot of overlaps and things that connect those books. Audre Lorde also talks about her experience with her health, and there's just so much in here. I think it's a really great introduction to Audre Lorde, who is one of the like well-known seminal 20th century black scholars, and I think that this is a really good way to be introduced to her work, because it includes like famous works such as her work on poetry, and I can't remember what that's called. It has a really famous name and it's gone from my head. Poetry is Not a Luxury, and it has like well-known works and goes along with some of her well-known like ideas about culture and things, and it also is spread over a time period, so it gives you a good smattering of her thoughts and the development of them over the course of the years that it covers. Those are 9 non-fiction books that are very short and that you could definitely fit in one or two of before the end of this month, and ones that I would definitely highly recommend. Please let me know in the comments down below any short non-fiction that you would recommend. I'm sure other people would love to hear from them as well as me. Thank you for watching, and I will see you again very soon. Bye bye.